What's up, guys? Twice here with the first of a new series that I'm going to be starting. This is not going to happen all the time, but whenever I have a good idea for something like this, I'm going to go ahead and try to make a video for it. This is going to be the first video for deck concepts. So this is something that I've wanted to do for a while. I've had the idea kind of going over in my mind and just trying to think about how exactly I would try to put it into a video, and I think I've got a pretty good idea now. So this one is going to be my deck concept for a Roman Legion buddy fight deck, specifically based around the idea of turning those warriors into Dragon Knights. The cool thing I like about the Dragon Knights in buddy fight is that they're based around like great warriors. For instance, they have El Quixote right here, who, though Don Quixote is not an actual warrior, he's still a historical quote-unquote figure. And, you know, that can be something that you can parlay into a lot of different realms of history. And I think that Rome would actually be a great place to start with this. One, because the Dragon Knights don't actually have any Romans among them. The closest thing they have is Hannibal, who's not Roman, he's actually Carthaginian. And so, you know, that can be kind of a pain. But I think this would actually be really cool because they had the Shinsengumi, who were their own group of Japanese warriors and had their own their own Dragon Knight deck. They were still Dragon Knights, but they were more, you know, oriented towards their own strategy. And I think you could very well do that with a lot of figures from Roman history as well. Now, if you know me, you know that I'm a Romanophile. I love Roman history. I listen to a lot of podcasts about it. I read a couple different books. And right now I will recommend to you guys that if you also are a fan of Roman history, you listen to The History of Rome. It's a great podcast by Mike Duncan. It's a few years old, but it's excellent in all of its research. It's very long. It's almost 200 episodes long, each of them a little over 15 minutes. But I mean, it is extremely thorough in going over the history of Rome. So today I'm going to look at a couple different figures from Roman history, as well as some different concepts I have for spells and possible impacts that I think would be really cool in this kind of deck. So originally, I needed to kind of find a way to put all of the monsters or all the figures like into monster cards and see how they would play with one another. So we're going to go over some key figures from Roman history today with our good old friend Wikipedia, starting with one of the greatest Romans that there was during the Second Punic War, which is Scipio Africanus. Scipio Africanus was kind of the Roman counterpart to Hannibal. He was actually known as the Roman Hannibal, as it says right there. And so he's the one that won Rome the Second Punic War, which gave it its dominance in the Mediterranean. I don't particularly know what exactly kind of ability I would like Africanus to have, but he's one of the figures that needs to have a Dragon Knight, because he's just that good. He's one of the best known Roman generals in history, and arguably, before the era of Julius Caesar and the triumvirate, probably the greatest Roman general there was. So Africanus definitely needs, you know, his own Dragon Knight. And then we move on to, this is kind of be something else. These aren't warriors that I'm going to go into, but they definitely have some kind of influence when it comes to Roman history. So these are going to be like the Roman poets and writers, the first of which we have to do is Cicero. Marcus Tullius Cicero is by far one of the greatest Roman orators, politicians, philosophers. I mean, you can look at his resume right here. He was so influential when it came to his prose style that all European literature leading up to like I think it was the mid-19th century was either a return to or a reaction to his style. Cicero is by far one of the most important figures in Roman politics, even throughout its entire history, even though he unfortunately died a terrible death at the hands of its first emperor, who is Augustus, but we'll get to him in a second. So Cicero, again, not quite sure what his ability would be. It has to be something utility-based, though, because he's not a soldier, which means he doesn't fight, but he can do things like increase gauge, increase cards in hand, and that's probably what I would want him for, given that, you know, it would just make sense that a deck like this, which is very offensive, would kind of need to have more access to utilities, which Cicero would be able to do. And now we get into one of my other ideas for the deck, and that is the idea of introducing the triumvirates as being kind of a method of using this deck strategy. And the first of which we have to look to is the first triumvirate, of course, which was begun by Mr. Julius Caesar. He is arguably the most well-known figure in Roman history. aside from Augustus, is the most important figure in Roman history, is one of the greatest military generals of all time, a very selfish man he was indeed. However, Julius Caesar, I mean, there's an entire play by Shakespeare written about him. So there you go, or at least about his death. So Caesar, along with the other two triumvirs in Pompey Magnus and Marcus Lucius Crassus, who was like one of the richest men in history, would be a triumvirate. And the idea for the triumvirate would be that, so these would all be size 1 monsters, just like the Shinzengumi, and that if you were to have like Caesar in the center with Pompey on the left or right, and then like Crassus on the left or right, then you could use, my idea is Pompey's ability, and pay something like 1 gauge to increase all of their power and critical until the end of the turn. This means that having the full triumvirate gives you a strong advantage in the game. Now, it's not like with the Shinzengumi where if you have one of them, I forget what his name is, on the field, then he increases the critical of all of the cards just by being there. In this case, you would be paying 1 gauge to also get the additional power increase, just for that turn. But having all of those size 1 monsters who are very strong, have high criticals, and can, like pierce through a lot of your opponent's center very quickly, I mean, that would be really helpful. So definitely using the triumvirates as kind of a means of, using this deck strategy would be really cool. And then I had another idea for Julius Caesar's ability, in that if he were to be destroyed, based on history itself, then you would somehow be able to call from your deck, or call from your hand or whatever, good old Augustus. Augustus is the first emperor of Rome, arguably its greatest emperor. He is the adopted son of Caesar, and actually his great-nephew, and as you can see right here by the Augustus of Prima Porta, which is a statue that was found at his wife's house, he's probably one of the most iconic figures as well. He's wearing a cuirass right here, which is this little tunic, that displays all kinds of different great things that he did over the course of his reign. This little baby right here is actually called a Cupid. It shows his descendancy from the goddess Venus. And basically, he would be what starts off the second triumvirate, which is composed of him. Let me go over here really quickly. Our good old friend Mark Antony, or Mark, I am the wrong horse, Antony, because he kind of lost to Augustus. And then Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, who was kind of the lesser of the triumvirs. But these 3 together would be the second triumvirate. Their abilities would be kind of similar to the first in that you would get an advantage, some kind of power advantage, by having all 3 of them on the field. However, Augustus himself would play a much more important part of this deck. He would probably actually be the buddy monster for the deck. Why? Again, because he's Rome's first emperor, and probably its most iconic figure aside from Julius Caesar. And in combination with him and this other idea I had in mind for a spell card, aka the Pax Romana, or the Roman Peace, you would actually be able to see the strategy of this deck begin to shape a little bit sooner. So the Pax Romana is this 200-year period of peace after Augustus took rule. As you can see, it's also called the Pax Augusta because it was introduced by Augustus. And it was essentially this period from 70 AD to 192 AD when you had this really long-standing, really productive peace in Rome, when food production was at its highest, when civilization was at its highest, the people were extremely productive, they were happy, the empire is expanding, it's becoming wealthier, and all of these other things. So the Pax Romana, being the Roman peace, the idea for this set card is what I would like to make it, would be that your opponent can only declare 1 attack per turn, and then every attack after that they would need to pay 1 gauge in order to initiate. Now that means that your opponent is going to be eating up a lot of the resources just to attack you. However, that price would be doubled if you were to have Augustus on the field, and specifically in the center, because again, Augustus is the one who started it. So, as long as Augustus is in the center, then your opponent will be paying 2 gauge to initiate their second, third, and whatever after that attack. This can steal your opponent's momentum very quickly, and it's a pretty reasonable cost. Now the thing is that because your opponent can still declare 1 free attack per turn, their obvious target is Augustus. However, I have a couple ideas for counterspells in this deck. One of them would be this, Damnatio Memoriae. So as you can see, Damnatio Memoriae is a Latin phrase which literally means damnation of memory. This was a fate worse than death in ancient Rome. it's not necessarily that you are, losing your memory or that people are losing their memory of you. No, it's that you are literally declared to have not existed at all. And so all efforts are taken to erase that person from history. This is a really good example right here. This is called the Severantando. And this is poor old Geta, who was declared damnatio memoria, or damned from memory, by his brother, Caracalla, and his face was erased from that family portrait. And so this is a really interesting concept because governments still do this today. They still, well, at least they used to. Think back to the Soviet Union and how good Stalin was at declaring people erased from the collective conscience. And the scary thing is that we don't actually know how effective this policy was. Because when you erase someone from history, how do you tell that they were ever declared punished at all? That's a really interesting thing to think about. So the idea for the counterspell that damnatio memoriae would be is that whenever one of your monsters is destroyed, you would pay some kind of cost, either 1 or 2 gauge, and if your card was destroyed by a monster or a spell, you would send all copies of that card from your opponent's deck to the drop zone. Again, that steals their momentum very quickly, because let's say you're facing, Darkness Dragon World, and they use Death Grip on you. That's a really useful counterspell that they have that you now completely eliminate with this card. So you combo Damnatio Memoriae as a counterspell with something like Pax Romana, where you're forcing your opponent to eat up more resources to declare attacks. And then my skill idea for Augustus would be whenever something attacks him, it either loses power or he gains power, just to kind of give you a little more advantage during that battle. Then you're looking at a more defensive style of play, but then you include things like the triumvirate of Caesar, Pompey, the Crassus, and then Augustus, along with Antony and Lepidus, that this would be a really interesting both defensive and offensive style deck that would be able to keep the momentum on your side because you can declare stronger attacks per turn. You can prevent your opponent from making more attacks, and if they do try to kind of turn the tables on you, then you can use something like Damnatio Memoriae to punish them for that, and then prevent it from happening again. Moreover, I had this idea for the impact, the Roman Triumph. So the Roman Triumph is one of the most iconic ceremonies that there is in ancient Rome. Every general that there ever was always wanted to have one because they're basically, make you like this godlike figure when it comes to your prominence in ancient Rome. So the Roman Triumph would kind of be the idea for the impact card, that it's kind of like the pay 4 gauge and then you can do something. My idea is that if you have a Dragon Knight on the right and left, then you can pay 4 gauge, and if both of your centers are open, you do damage to your opponent equal to their combined critical. That's really strong, and if you're able to use something like, again, Pompey's ability, where you're increasing the criticals of your cards, then you can do probably more damage than what you're paying for. So it may take a little bit more of a tweaking when it comes to its cost system and its ability, but I think that this should absolutely be the concept for the impact card, because this is one of the most important things in Roman history and really is the pinnacle of a Roman general's career. And then there's a really cool idea I had for another counterspell. So right here you say that during the Roman Triumph, it says that a companion or public slave would whisper in the ear of the general who was holding the triumph or was being celebrated by the triumph this phrase, memento mori, which literally translates to remember that you are mortal, that no matter what kind of glory you have achieved in your life, you must die at some point. And that's a really interesting juxtaposition with all that is going on in these extremely elaborate and expensive ceremonies. And this kind of counterspell would essentially be like decreasing your opponent's power when they attack, or just giving yourself some kind of advantage. And it plays into that idea of that you're stealing your opponent's momentum away from them, while also giving yourself the ability to have more offensive ability. So I hope you guys like this deck concept. There's still probably a little bit more that needs to be worked on it. It's not totally finished, but I think that this would be really cool because the Dragon Knights themselves are a very interesting archetype. They have the ability to play off of a lot of historical figures, and they have a lot of potential to make a deck like this, and they don't have any Romans as of yet, so I think this would be pretty fair. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to always have a great day and keep card fighting. I hope this series becomes a little bit more popular and I can have more ideas for it in the future. So yeah, thanks again for watching. Have a great day. Goodbye.